Hello, Rocky River High School. This is Principal Rob Witten here to take you through active shooter mitigation and training. Before we dive into the specifics, a brief introduction is necessary. Active shooting incidents have occurred with increased frequency since the year 2000, right after the Columbine incident happened. And Columbine forced schools and law enforcement to change how they respond. There's been a lot of research on this. Blair and Schweitz, U.S. Department of Justice, and the FBI, all of their data comes to the same conclusion that while these events are very, very rare, they have increased over time. Active shootings have changed how schools and law enforcement respond. If you were in high school in the late 90s, you would never be going through a program like this. But since we've adapted to the changing times, you now do. And knowledge is your best weapon. Knowing how to react, knowing how to report things, that's the best thing you can be equipped with for this topic. The National Threat Assessment Center, in conjunction with the United States Secret Service, began publishing a document in 2020 that dealt with only attacks that were prevented ahead of time. And we'll get into the data here in a few minutes regarding that. But it's important to remember that attacks are preventable. And the biggest thing you can do as a student or even as one of our staff members is to report something that you hear or you see that may be suspicious. And you can report that to anyone in the building, including administrators and our SRO. There's a lot of research that reinforces the need to go through active shooter training, this is just a quick introductory course. We will go through drills later in the school year. But the research on this one supports the fact that, again, it's almost like the knowledge piece. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. While you'll certainly almost never encounter a situation like this, should you unfortunately be in one ever in your life, the more you know, the better your odds of survival are. And then when it comes to policy and law, Governor DeWine, who was the Ohio Attorney General in 2018, passed a set of requirements that schools must now follow. And the National Threat Assessment Center, as previously mentioned, also put out recommendations that have been used to eventually become policy. We are also required to report the completion of all of our drills to the state of Ohio. And we have to have an emergency management plan done every year that is also submitted to the state of Ohio and the Ohio School Safety Center. So a lot of the things that we're doing are required by law. One of the things that's interesting to take into account is just police response time for active shootings. The national average for police response time for all events, it doesn't matter what the event is 7.9 minutes. The national average for police response time during active shootings is 15 minutes. And this includes active shootings of any kind, not just ones in schools. But if you recall the Nashville school shooting, that police response time was exactly 15 minutes. The police response time in Rocky River is much, much quicker. So these do vary. If you live in a rural community, it's going to be much longer of a response time. If you live in a suburban community like Rocky River, it's going to be much, much faster. 50% of active shootings last between 4 to 6 minutes. And some schools in the state of Ohio have now legally allowed staff to conceal carry. Obviously, Rocky River is not one of them. But the response time in that case, under proper training scenarios, is 2 seconds or less. Points to remember when we talk about this topic, you guys as high school students are either adults or will become adults in the very near future. So we always have honest, direct conversations. We don't try to sugarcoat things. We want to be as direct as possible so you know what the truth is. Always remember, events are very rare. When they do happen, they get a lot of media attention, so it makes it seem like it occurs much more frequently than it actually does. And at the end of the day, we want you to be prepared. Here at Rocky River High School, we practice a model called Run, Hide, Fight. We used to do ALICE, which is an acronym that stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. But Run, Hide, Fight is much easier to remember. It's very similar to Stop, Drop, and Roll for fire drills. So that's why we go with this verbiage now as opposed to ALICE. We'll talk about these in detail later, but they are all self-evident. Run, get away if you can. hide and barricade, and move to hard corners, which we'll talk about in a second. And then as a last measure, if you have to fight back, you fight back. Running, this is your first option. Obviously, if you're ever in danger in any type of situation, it doesn't even have to be an active shooting situation, and you can get away from that situation, you should get away from it. So get out if you can. And obviously, it removes targets from the building. It also follows a natural response, just like a fire drill. You want to get out of a building, and it is statistically your highest chance of survival. We have 2 evacuation sites. We had sent these out to parents. These are our reunification sites. Should we ever need to evacuate, it could be anything from a small fire to a water leak to a violent event. Our main evac site is St. Chris Church, and then our other evacuation site is St. Thomas. So should you ever have to evacuate and you get split up from your teacher or your friends, and you're able to get to St. Chris or St. Thomas, and help will be there. Hiding, we don't pack people in corners of classrooms and hide or anything like that, but hiding means you cannot get out of your classroom in the event that there's a violent intruder, or if you could get out of your classroom, it might present more danger than staying in the classroom. What that means is if there's someone that has a weapon directly outside your classroom, you probably don't want to go in the hallway. So your best option is going to be to barricade the entry point of the door. All classroom doors are required to be shut and locked while class is going on. But we don't want to rely on locks, because all locks, as you know, can be broken with enough force. Barricading is simple and fast. And there's a couple goals. One, you're just trying to buy more time. It provides you an opportunity to counter, and it helps distract a potential attacker that may be trying to come into a room. The majority of research on past active shooting events shows that individuals that commit these acts do not want to mess around with barricaded rooms. It takes a lot of time to get through them. It's difficult. They are looking primarily for quick, easy targets. So even a barricade of putting a Chromebook cart in front of a door and is going to slow someone down, potentially dissuade them from coming in the room and trying to find another room that is not barricaded. This next slide just shows you a picture of a barricade. Anybody can do it. It's very simple and self-explanatory. Basically, take as much classroom stuff that's available and put it in front of a door. Is it going to stop someone from coming in? It's not 100% guaranteed, of course, but it will slow them down and buy them time. And if someone's walking by this classroom that you're looking at, they're just going to keep moving. This was very evident in the Virginia Tech shooting. When the Virginia Governor's Report came out on it, they break down what happened in every classroom that was in the vicinity, and the barricaded rooms, the shooter did not enter, or tried to enter and was having trouble and went back to the rooms that were not barricaded. As a last resort, you want to fight back. Again, this is never your first resort, but if you're in a situation where you're trying to protect yourself and or others, and you need to fight back, then you should. At this point, it's just about survival. There's a term called an OODA loop cycle. This came from the United States Air Force, and it was designed by fighter pilots. OODA loop stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And it's a simplification of 4 steps that your brain goes through when trying to engage with the target. So fighter pilots, when let's say they're chasing another plane, they have to observe their surroundings, orient themselves, make a decision, and then act on it. And anything that breaks that cycle makes the individual start back at the beginning of the cycle, observation. So we're talking fractions of a second. That's why Alice programming suggested throwing things at an intruder, even if it was a stapler, because people will come back and say, why would you throw a stapler at someone that has a gun? That doesn't make sense. And the science behind it, if something's coming at someone's head, it interrupts their OODA loop cycle. Again, it might just be fractions of seconds, but it's time that it's potentially buying you. That's the premise behind it. And then we talk about this thing called the fatal funnel, and I'll show you a picture in a second. But every room, regardless of whether it's a classroom or an office building room, has what's called a fatal funnel. And this is a military/police term where when clearing rooms, anyone that's inside the 2 red lines, you're in trouble if you're in there and someone comes through the door with a gun. So removing yourself from that fatal funnel along one of the walls, which would be at the bottom of the screen, between the hard corners. And what you want to do is not congregate in a corner. You don't want to be sitting on the ground. You want to be on your feet, almost like in a single file line against one of the walls. And every room, and your teachers will show you this, have hard corners marked. Some hard corners are better than others depending on the window layout of your classroom. The hard corners are marked with the circular Rocky River RR logos in each room. And if you get between those two circles, you are not visible from the hallway. The point of that means it removes you from the fatal funnel. It puts you in a position where your chance of survival is much higher, and you cannot be viewed from the glass in the doors. If the lights were out and you were between hard corners and someone walked by the room and you were being quiet, silent, they would not know it would look like the room was empty. So hard corners were required after the Parkland shooting in all Broward County, Florida school districts. And we have taken the advice of Broward County and we've put them in every classroom in our district as well. If you have questions about where the hard corners are, you can ask your teacher. Okay, probably the most important slide we're going to go through is this: averted and thwarted attacks. This was done with the U.S. Secret Service's research. This is the most recent research they published. 84% of attacks that were thwarted took place in high schools. Now, these are attacks that were stopped before they happened, not attacks that actually took place. 95% of suspects are males and current students. 45% of planned attacks were motivated by grievances. So a student was upset, either with other students or staff members, up to and including school resource officers. And usually these are major grievances, not just someone that's complaining or like, oh, someone's being mean to me. It's someone that's talking about something for a long, extended period of time, and they're using graphic language, violent language. If you hear those things from anybody, you should report it. 70% of thwarted attacks, the individuals involved had diagnosed mental health disorders or substance abuse issues. 96% of attacks were planned to include the use of firearms. And probably the most concerning aspect of this is that 70% of the potential attackers had access to firearms in their home. Not necessarily a big deal if someone has firearms in their home because they're very common in the United States. The next statistic is the one that's really concerning, and that's 63% of potential attackers with access to firearms had unimpeded access due to the guns not being stored safely or correctly to prevent unwanted use. So what that means is people that had guns that were loaded, literally laying around their house or just sitting in closets. If guns were stored correctly with, unloaded behind a lock, in a gun safe or with trigger locks on the weapons, the number of attacks will go down a lot. Also, a lot of times firearms are stolen. 94% of averted attackers had communicated their plans ahead of time, either to peers, adults, or through various social media channels. This is really, really important. Our student body and our staff have been excellent at this, where if they see something suspicious, they report it, and that's a huge percentage. So almost every planned attack on the school is communicated ahead of time, and somebody knows about it. We would rather have someone report something and end up being false, or even some sort of unfunny joke where we can actually get to the bottom of it, as opposed to someone seeing something and saying, I don't know if that's that serious, I'm not going to say anything. So we're not trying to worry anybody, but if you see something that seems really weird or out of character for someone, or weird social media posts, please let us know. 83% of suspected perpetrators were detained by law enforcement within 2 days of initial reports being filed. And then lastly, just the practice and protocols here. Rocky River uses threat assessments to stop issues before they happen. That's a recommendation of the Secret Service. It's a proactive measure. We use research-based threat assessment training program called CS-TAG that came out of the University of Virginia in 2022. Dr. Cornell was the individual who created that. We have anti-ramming bollards in front of our main entry points. Vehicle attacks have become more common. They're very common in Europe. There was one on Ohio State's campus a few years back, so we've installed these. They look like planters. They're out in front of the main entrance and the Wager entrance. And the purpose of them is to stop any type of large vehicle that would try to get through and run through our glass entryways. All entrances are hardened and include secure vestibules and or man traps. That's why you have to get buzzed in the morning. I know it can be annoying, but that's the reason behind it. So we thank you for your patience. I've already addressed hard corners that are installed in all classrooms. Doors and doors of classrooms are to be shut and locked when students are present. And then just look around your classroom and then consider how you would position heavy objects near doors should you need to barricade. Again, we appreciate your time for this topic. I know it's a serious topic, but we want everyone to be as safe as possible. If you have any questions, um, you're welcome to see me or your teachers or your administrators. And again, thanks a lot and have a great year.